Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Epic Events podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Sasha Frieze. Sasha Frieze is the author of the Chief Events Officer's Playbook, which has been shortlisted for the Business Book of the Year award. She has spent 25 plus years watching talented event professionals get overlooked, not because their work isn't good, but because no one taught them how to think and communicate like a strategic leader. In this episode, she will share the mindset shifts, frameworks, and career moves that separate planners who earn a seat at the table from those who stay stuck in the execution lane. Expect honest talk about why busyness is the enemy of influence and how to make the business case for events in the boardroom and what it actually takes to become a chief event officer. Sasha, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sasha, can you just walk us a bit about your journey leading all the way up to you launching the Chief Events Officer's Playbook? So, if you can kind of get a brief summary of that.
Absolutely. Like many people, I fell into the events industry. I discovered the commercial conference company I worked for, a precursor of Informa, and it was a brilliant way to learn the events industry as a young person, right across the board. And from there, I worked in a number of different organizations, and ended up running my own agency, The Business Narrative, for a number of years, working with clients right across associations, corporates, trade shows, conference companies. Um, on an agency model. Nowadays, I spend more time on working with clients strategically, coaching, training, and of course, at the end of last year, I published the book, which is a kind of synthesis of all the great stories people have told me over the years. What I realized when I was writing the book is that what makes it really fun is like real stories. And so I actually made a spreadsheet of like all the different stories that prove different points. So there's actually about 100 sort of little case studies in the book, just talking through different examples of ideas of different events. So yeah, that is my journey. I have covered pretty much every sector of the events world.
Sasha, your book seems like a clarion call for taking a strategic approach to event management. There has been talk about event planners needing a seat at the table for decades. I have been in the industry myself for almost 15 years now. Why
Mhm.
hasn't the industry cracked this yet, and what's actually changed in the last few years?
Um, I mean, you're right. That seat at the table conversation that has been running for decades, and I think the industry frames it as a recognition problem, but it's also a positioning kind of issue. I think that there is something that has historically happened, which is you know, events are about operations and logistics and delivery, and that's where we've came from. Um, but actually, the world is moving, towards events with a true purpose. Um, and so the distinction, for me between an event planner and the chief event officer isn't exactly, it's not a job title upgrade, right? It's actually about thinking differently, reconfiguring identity. And, you know, it's not just about delivering logistics. Logistics and operations are incredibly important. I massively admire my colleagues who do that. But the reality is, nobody gets promoted for knowing how many croissants to order, and it's about delivering a transformational change. And what I see when I talk to event planners, there are a million different job titles, and it's a very unstructured kind of career. But what I see is people really understand both the nuts and bolts of the delivery, but they also understand the strategy piece. But they're not always able to kind of connect that. Sometimes there are a few too many rungs down the organization, or the key stakeholders get involved in the event a little bit too late. Um, and so, where I'm at is event planners are brilliant, right? Event planners are problem solvers. I sometimes think that if event planners were running the world, we might not be in the kind of challenging situation we are right now.
I love that.
Um, but actually, what we really want is to grow the role. I mean, at a time when, I think was it in the I think it was in the Bizzabo research that it said 78% um, of event professionals and marketers saw events as the most important marketing channel. And so now is the time to kind of step up. and move on from, well, to deliver excellently, no question about it, but to talk about the transformational changes that the events deliver to the organization.
Uh, Sasha, you have argued a lot that senior event leaders are very often just really busy creating events and don't have the time or headspace to think strategically. How does someone break that cycle when the workload never stops? You can imagine that when someone is running an event, it's just very very hard to kind of go from an execution mindset to a strategic mindset. How do someone just break that cycle?
Look, I don't think it's necessarily for event professionals to break that cycle. It's for organizations to think differently. And I wrote the book as much for event professionals as for, C-suite professionals, especially CMOs who event people are typically reporting to really understand the changes that we need, and that kind of internal service desk model, you get your brief and you deliver. Um, to some degree, that's kind of self-reinforcing. Every time you just go like, yes, okay, we'll get on with it, you're creating more work. And what I really want people to do is to interrogate those briefs and to question them and engage in those strategic conversations. And I really invite event professionals to kind of, move on from being an order taker, move up by kind of leading on the strategy side. But at the same time, um, it's a structural issue for organisations. Event planners are busy enough, and the people that I talk to in coaching and training and consulting, tell me that they are juggling. I imagine you have this experience as well. They are juggling many different, calls from right across the organisation, how to deal with things. But in reality, what they want to be able to do is to deliver real change. But it needs organisations to think differently and take advantage of their brilliant event professionals. Events are like amazing human, creative, interactive gatherings that change people. And rather than it being a kind of siloed experience within an institution, which can deliver value to some degree, when the whole organization delivers that, that's a game changer. I don't have to tell you, events are a team sport. And when you just, give the brief to the event people and like leave them to get on with it, it's a very different experience than when the whole organization gets involved. A lot of the strategy work I do is working at a kind of mid to senior level to help people start those amazing conversations about, the truth is every bit of the organization has an impact on events. It's about marketing, it's about sales, it's about operations, it's about procurement, it's about finance, it's about strategy, and it needs everybody to kind of own it. And that helps deliver the strategic value.
I love that. And just making that strategic case, walk us through what participant centered design actually looks like in practice and how it changes the conversation you have with leadership about what events are for. So that when you're in the room with the C suite, what language do you use? How you translate event outcomes into something that makes executive lean in rather than tune out? So if you can just guide us a bit on that.
Look, I think there's two different things here. There's a question about participant-centered design, and there's a question about when you get in the boardroom, how do you talk to people? And that participant-centered design piece, is really powerful. I mean, the book has a whole model, the event transformation blueprint, a kind of 10-step framework that talks people through, the four key questions that underpin the 10 steps. you know so that's about why are you creating the event. You want to start with the purpose, the transformation, the journey, and having this blueprint is a real opportunity for event professionals to have a language to talk to the board. Then you talk about who it's for, who are the stakeholders, how are we going to reach the whole market. Only then do you talk about what the event design is going to be, what's the experience, what's the content, what's the welcome, and then you think at that same time, like, what is the intended impact? How does it align with organizational objectives? Because events have to change something. And when you are talking to the board in that language of transformational change, the impact on the organization, whatever it is the organization does. For corporates, that might be about sales and leads and, delivering that kind of value. For associations, huge part of the events world, that might be about membership or about policy changes in your organization. What's really interesting about the kind of the commercial event world, trade shows, conferences, those media owned events, they are a commercial model in themselves. Their strategic purpose is ultimately to create commercial value, profit on the bottom line. But what often happens to the people in those businesses that they're very focused on the commercial slice they've got, but they don't get that chance to own the bigger strategic piece. And so I really encourage people to talk to the board in terms of the metrics that make a difference. I think when you get that opportunity to kind of talk up the organization, like own that strategy. Don't go in the room and say, we had 150 delegates. That's a flat measure. What you want to say is, here are the three changes. These are the three transformations that happened because of this event. I really invite people to make like a kind of one-page dashboard, something that's really easy for C-suite people to just get the top line impact. Great event professionals, great event strategists are really great at talking about the impact that the events have made, not about how many people came, how much money they saved, what the venue was like. And I think the other question you asked me is about the participant-centered design piece, and that is really powerful. At the heart of the book, there's a model based on the hero's journey. You probably know the hero's journey. It's a narrative model, that's used in a lot of film, TV stuff. And what it seems to me is that really powerful events have the participant at the heart of the story. Every event is a journey. I hope that when I go to an event, I go on a journey. I start on day one, I'm whoever I am on day one. As I go through that 2-day event, I have experiences, I learn great things, I connect with people. That is my journey. I am changed. But I think we need to design those journeys into the events that we create. And it's a kind of circle model. So it takes this idea of the adventure, the initiation, the transformation, and the return. The idea of the hero's journey is that you return a changed person. But the adventure piece is effectively, the message, the marketing. The initiation is the welcome, the experience you have as you get to the event. The transformation is what happens at the gathering. And the return, how you're changed, that's the impact. You're energized, you're inspired, the continued connections and conversations, those lasting transformations, your fulfilled kind of career, personal achievements. All of that stuff, when the participants at the heart of it, it's really powerful. One of the interesting things when I was creating this model and writing the book is I sent it to a few colleagues who are now kind of CEOs of various different event businesses. And it was really interesting. The feedback that I got back was like, no, it's not the participant's journey, it's our journey.
Interesting.
And that made me realize when I mapped that onto the success of their events, what I saw was the people who saw the event as their organization's journey were not delivering the kind of success. You think of some of the big flagship events that everybody talks about, Canva Creates or any of those. Those have the participant at the heart of it. Every single element of the event is designed around what value the participant gets out of it and how they are changed. And I think that can just be really powerful.
I absolutely love that. I'm sure a lot of people wants to go through their journey, and I just want to learn a bit more about like how to build influence from where you are. So not everyone has a title yet. What can a mid-career event planner can do right now to
Mhm.
shift how they are perceived within their organization? Can you talk us through that event transformation blueprint at the heart of the book? How does it support event planners in claiming that strategy seat?
Mhm.
And what's the biggest mistake planners make when they do get in front of their leadership, and how they show up? How
Mhm.
can they show up a bit differently?
Sure. I mean, building influence for event planners is really is really important. And those mid-career people, you've got to own your career. You've absolutely got to own it. You've got to take every opportunity. Take every opportunity to work, to talk to people across the organization. The very nature of working in events is you're going to be talking to a whole range of different people. If your CEO is going to be doing the opening speech, make sure you go have a meeting with them and brief them, build those relationships, and use the tools of the event transformation blueprint to talk at a strategic level. And also remember to kind of introduce yourself. Instead of saying, "Hi, I'm Sasha, I'm an event planner," you might say, "Hi, I'm Sasha, I create events that change our organization and deliver more leads."
Love
That
that.
automatically tells the story of you showcasing your strategic thinking. At a time when the event industry is on fire, right? There are budgets are tight, there are challenges, there are global and geopolitical challenges. There's I actually think AI is a massive opportunity for events.
100%.
I feel like this is where the trust is. This is where the human connections are. This is so much better than the kind of AI slot that lands in my inbox every single day.
Yeah.
But it is a real opportunity to showcase your strategic thinking in every conversation you have. I think of the book. Um, I think of the book as a why to rather than a how to. There's a
Makes
lot of there's a lot of a brilliant event or operational books out there, but I believe this is the first book about event strategy. How to own that strategic piece, how to talk that language, how to raise your game, and I think there are real opportunities for event planners as the world kind of really changes to
yeah.
to do that.
So you just showed the book. And again, your book is called The Chief Events Officer Playbook. I want everyone else listening to this also know about it. What's the one mindset shift that unlocks everything else? And what does
Mhm.
career progression looks like for strategic event professionals? Can you walk us through some of the new roles that are emerging, or is this about redefining the ones that already exist? And if you can just give one piece of unfiltered advice to an event planner who feels stuck in the operation lane, what would it be? Because I'm sure everyone's dream is to get that title, which is a chief event officer. Help us a bit on
Look,
that.
I think you might get the chief event officer title, but what you might do even more is own that chief event officer mindset and really grow your influence inside the organization. Because I believe inside, every great event planner, there's a strategist, and the playbook exists to help you find yours. To use these frameworks, the language, and give you as an event planner the permission to kind of step out of that execution delivery lane, important as it is, and into the strategic conversations about kind of changing the organization. What is the one mindset shift? I think it's about talking about the transformation. What do we change? The truth is, if live events don't change something, they're kind of a webinar, right? It's like I'm talking and people are chatting and saying, "Hey, I'm in Bangladesh. Hello, I'm in London."
Yeah.
You know, that is not transformational. It's content, it's information, it's knowledge. That's really important. But what events do is create that real transformation. And whether that's around, there's a big debate going on in the industry right now, whether that's around kind of networking and connection, or whether it's about content and the kind of content, content also is really powerful, but live content has to be special. Anything
100%.
that could be a webinar should totally be a webinar.
Mhm.
Live content has to have that energy, conversation, opportunity to talk to the person next to you, share ideas, sit around the table. And so all of that helps create really powerful transformation. And I think starting to talk when you sit down with somebody senior and you're having your first conversation about the event, rather than saying, what's the lead time? How many streams is it? How many people are you expecting? When should we book the venue? What do you want for lunch? Those are all important questions, but they come way down the line. What you want to be saying to somebody to showcase your strategic value. And actually, I'm starting to build some online training now around people really owning this. So if anybody's interested in that, they should connect with me on LinkedIn and talk about it, because I believe there's this real opportunity to use those conversations to be saying, let's talk about what is the biggest change this event can make for you, CMO, CEO, sales director, whatever it is. When you wake up the day or the week or the month after the event, what's the biggest transformation that's made a difference to the organization? And once you get into that organizational mindset about how your events deliver change, and that change is value to the organization, you kind of secure your career, because you're not just someone who's really good at getting the tea on, which is what I think my mum thinks that I mostly do. You are someone who knows how to curate, create, design. I mean, it's such a magical thing being in events, right? There are so many different pieces to it, but I sometimes think of event professionals as almost like conductors of an orchestra. There are so many kind of moving parts. You've got all those little pieces, and you know how to create this magical gathering that delivers enormous value. That's where the magic is.
I love that. Sasha, if any of the event planners or anyone else wants to learn a bit more about the book, about some of the consulting work you do, some of the
Mhm.
strategy work you do, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
So the book's available at all major retailers and on Amazon in every country. The best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. To send me a DM, I'm often on LinkedIn, or if you want to email me directly, I'm sasha@chiefeventsofficer.co. And I am excited to have conversations about the magical difference that events can make to organizations.
Sasha, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you everyone for listening in. We look forward to seeing you all in the next episode. Sasha, thank you so much for being here.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.